taxes on the people that create those jobs. Yeah.
One argument that I've heard over and over again about a gold standard is there's not enough gold for all the money that we've printed. Do you have a rebuttal to that?
Well, not at this price, there's not. The gold price is just going to have to go up, that's all. But the idea that there's not enough gold in the world is ludicrous. It doesn't matter how much gold there is. Prices are just going to adjust to the level of gold that exists. Money needs to be scarce. That's what makes it valuable. If it was plentiful, if there was all the gold that we needed, then it would have no value. What makes it rare and valuable is that it's scarce. And if you look at historically, the gold supply increases by maybe 1 or 2% a year. That's it. That's pretty predictable, pretty consistent. And it works great. I mean, we had the Industrial Revolution on a gold standard. People that say the economy can't grow on a gold standard, our economy grew more on a gold standard than since we left it. If you look at the standard of living of the average American from, let's say, 1800 to 1900, and compare the way the average American lived and the way he lived at the end of that century, and then compare that to the changes that have made since we've been on the fiat standard, it's a much bigger difference. You know, the standard of living grew a lot faster, and imagine how much wealthier society would be, how much less we would all be working, how much more prosperity and leisure we would all enjoy if we had continued on the gold standard for the 20th century. Instead, we went off it and we sacrificed a lot of economic growth in the process. Now, the other source of this big bubble, or this big problem, has to do with the U.S. dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. You know, up until the Second World War, all the countries were using gold. Everybody was on a gold standard, including the United States. And after the Second World War, America pretty much had almost all the world's gold. 90% or more than 90% of the world's gold was held by the U.S. government. And where did we get all that gold? I mean, we didn't mine it all. We got it because people used it to buy the products that we produced. And how do we produce all these products? We produced them because we were the freest country in the world. We had more capitalism and more freedom, and as a result, we were more productive. And the world wanted the stuff that we produced, yet they weren't productive enough to produce stuff for us, so they had to give us their gold. So we had all this gold. And we went around to all the other countries and basically proposed a new monetary system. And this was going to be where, instead of foreign central banks backing up their currencies with gold, they would back them up with a dollar. And the dollar, though, was backed up by gold. Of course, that's the only reason it made sense. If the dollar was backed by nothing, then we couldn't have conned the world into signing up for this arrangement. But everybody knew the dollar was as good as gold. And if you had $35, you'd get 1 ounce of gold. That was the deal we made with the world. And what was in it for the world was if they held dollars, they got interest. If they held gold, they had storage costs. So it made sense. Hold the dollars. We're on a dollar standard. The dollar is the reserve currency. The dollar is backed by gold. America is the world's richest country. They have the biggest trade surplus. They're the world's biggest creditor nation. They've got all the gold. Good deal. Well, it was a great deal for us because the minute we got that privilege, we abused it. Because now all of a sudden, we could pay for our imports by printing money. Now, technically, we were supposed to have the gold to back it up, but that didn't stop the government. They just lied, right? They wrote checks that they couldn't really cash, assuming that people would just not care or not notice. Well, after the 1960s, when we had the guns and butter economy, the war on poverty, the Great Society, we went to the moon, Vietnam, all this stuff, we were running big deficits. And some of our creditors began to notice this and realize that we couldn't possibly have enough gold to back up these IOUs, which is what the Federal Reserve notes were. They were promises to pay real money. The real money was the gold that the Fed had in its vaults. So, rather than acting responsibly, rather than devaluing the dollar and allowing a deflation to occur, and cutting government spending and doing the right thing, the politicians did the expedient thing, but almost an unthinkable thing, and they defaulted. Nixon basically told our creditors, we promised to give you gold for your Federal Reserve notes. We're now going to give you nothing. You can hold on to them if you want, but you're not going to get any gold. And, the world should have gone back on a gold standard at that point, right? But they didn't. Now, they marked the dollar down rather dramatically. The dollar was marked down by about 2/3 during the 1970s. The Deutschmark, when the 1970s began, you can buy 4 Deutschmarks for the dollar. At the end, you can get about 1.5. The Swiss franc went from like 23 cents to 75 cents. The yen used to get 360 yen to the dollar. Later in the decade, it was down to like 150. Of course, it's a lot lower now, but that was a big drop during the 1970s. Oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel. I mean, that's why oil prices went up. It wasn't because of the Arabs. It was because of Nixon. It was because of what the government did. It was all the money we printed. Money lost value. Oil prices didn't go up at all. But in terms of a depreciated dollar, oil went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel. And gold prices went up from 35 up to over 800. Another thing happened, too, during the 1970s. A lot of women came into the workforce. And it wasn't because they were liberated. In fact, they were liberated before. But as a result of all this inflation and all these taxes, their husbands could no longer afford to support them. So they had to start working. Our standard of living declined dramatically with the loss of the purchasing power of the dollar. And in fact, I mentioned that oil I often use as an example. I think I even used it in that congressional testimony when people say, gasoline prices are so high now, we're paying almost $4 a gallon. These are, record high prices. Say they're not. They're actually lower than they were in the 1950s. Well, what do you mean they're lower? Well, back in the 1950s, you could buy a gallon of gasoline for $0.25. So all it cost 25 cents. Well, if you have a 1957 Chevy and you scoop around in the seat cushions and you find a quarter that was dropped there in 1957, you can still buy a gallon of gas with that quarter. You get change too, because it doesn't cost that much. It costs less because real money held its value. The only reason that oil is more expensive is because we're paying for it with depreciated dollars.